Welcome back to session 6. This is our final session together, and I've really enjoyed not only working on the material, but hopefully helping you as you prepare to teach this material to the folks in your own group. We talked today about how God can redeem us and anyone from an unbelieving past. I'm really kind of glad that the Apostle Paul is the last session, because I feel like in many ways we've saved the best for last. I have studied this man for over 28 years as a Christian. He is my favorite character in the entire Scripture besides Jesus. And there's many things we can learn from the Apostle Paul, but for this particular study, I think it goes without saying, if God can save Paul, he can save anybody. Of course, we're pretty familiar with the story. His name was not originally Paul, his name was originally Saul. And in the stories of Scripture, we see God changing names. Abram became Abraham, Sarai became Sarah, Cephas becomes Peter, Simon becomes Peter. This is another case of God changing a name because he changes an identity. So as you tell the story of the Apostle Paul sharing the gospel with King Agrippa in Caesarea, really drill down on the fact that here's a guy no one would have ever expected to become a Christian. He wasn't just, sort of a nominal guy who believed in God. He was antagonistic against the church. He hated Christianity. He's named after the Old Testament king Saul, Israel's first king. He becomes a rising star in the religious world of the Pharisees, and he becomes really famous because of his persecution of Christians. So as the Christian faith begins to grow after Jesus is raised from the dead, Saul took it upon himself to become the defender of a pure form of Judaism. Now, he had a very, very pure Jewish pedigree. So he goes on this crusade to persecute Christians, to have Christians arrested, and to even be a part of the first martyrdom. He is part of the stoning of Stephen that we read about earlier in the book of Acts, who actually lays down his life for Jesus Christ. So here's where we can really anchor our hope when it comes to the Apostle Paul. He serves as an example of the power of the gospel to transcend any culture, to break through any barrier, and to take one of the greatest enemies of the faith and turn them into one of the greatest evangelists. As a matter of fact, I wrote a few things down that I think would be encouraging to you, and also as you teach your sessions. The man who previously opposed Jesus is now obeying Jesus. The man who used to be a persecutor is now a preacher. The man who used to be an antagonizer is now an apologist. The man who used to be a religious expert is now a redeemed evangelist. I mean, gosh, come on. This is so meaty and rich. When you think about somebody that you know that's not a Christian, and you, in your mind, think they're a hopeless case, they're an atheist, they're an agnostic, they've been broken, they come from a bad background, they were raised in another culture, they come from a different faith. Don't forget what God did with the Apostle Paul. This will be extremely helpful in your sessions with the folks you're teaching, because if you would just ask them, tell me some people in your life, open up the floor, tell me some people in your life that you're praying for to give their lives to Jesus. And name them and tell us their background. Why do you think that they're unlikely to become a Christian? Maybe what you'll find out in your sessions is simply that some of the folks that are sitting there while you're teaching this, they're not even praying for their lost friends because they've already sort of given up hope, because it just seems so unbelievable that their friend or their family member or their coworker could ever hear the gospel and be saved. But this story of the Apostle Paul standing before King Agrippa in Caesarea towards the latter part of his life and ministry, testifying to meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus, telling the story about how Jesus stopped him dead in his tracks, can give anybody hope that the most unbelievable scenario could actually happen, that their coworker, their family member, their spouse, their child, no matter how unbelieving their past has been, doesn't mean they can't believe right now. See, our past does not predict our future, and Paul is a perfect example of that. His past was filled with violence, self-righteousness, and even bloodshed. But his future, because of the gospel, was filled with a sense of purpose and calling. Paul would even identify himself as the apostle to the Gentiles. He would spend the rest of his life attempting to get to the most unreachable people in the most unreachable places, and eventually his desire was to go to Rome so that he could get to the center of power, so that he could walk into the halls of influence and share the gospel with the Caesar himself. God can redeem anyone from an unbelieving past if they'll simply have enough faith to trust Christ as Lord. So as you wrap up this session and as you wrap up this study, draw people back to the power of the gospel. Draw people back to the reality of the fact that if they're not dead, God's not done. That what looks like a big failure can actually be a launching pad to a great platform where you can tell other people your story for the sake of the gospel. Don't forget, the same Jesus who changed Saul to Paul can change the most introverted, shy person to the most bold and anointed evangelist the world has ever known. And just like Paul shared the gospel with Agrippa, you and your friends can share the gospel with anybody that will sit still long enough to listen.